In Commander, gaining life is probably one of the worst things you could be doing, but today we're going to find a way to break it. Hello, my name's Deck Driver and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, we make a ton of Magic the Gathering decks. We talk about the game of Magic the Gathering, and overall just like to have a great time. Today, we're going to be talking about life gain in Commander, why it's not incredibly powerful, but how we're going to make something incredibly powerful out of the tools we do have available to us. In case you're wondering why life gain actually is pretty bad, it's mostly because of commander damage. No matter if you have 1,000 life or 2 life, you will die to commander damage as soon as it hits 21 damage total. You also immediately lose to poison counters as soon as you get to 10. Because of this, sometimes life gain does not get as much attention as it quite should. Now, if we completely ignore commander damage and we completely ignore any sort of poison counters, if you find yourself at a table with really no commanders as a win condition, or really no commanders that can pack a punch, life gain probably becomes one of the most incredibly frustrating strategies to deal with. Now, of course, if it's a giant creature strategy, you still could just get hit for 50 damage if you don't do anything about their board, but today our commander's gonna fix that. But we'll get back to that later. As a whole, life gain has quite a few ways that it can go. You can either have more of an aristocrat strategy that likes to chip down your opponents over and over and over again. You can run something like Sorin from Modern Horizons 3, which basically just wants to double its life total and ping down somebody for an incredible amount of damage. Or you can go the more combat-oriented route. Having something like a Soul Warden with an Ajani's Pridemade is gonna get your board incredibly big, incredibly fast. Seeing as you're getting almost double the amount of triggers, since instead of 2 players, it's 4. Because of this, life gain is a relatively flexible strategy in Commander. It just tends to not be as powerful as you might think, simply due to the fact that commander damage does exist, and it's not uncommon in Commander that you can get 3v1 if you're at a life total of 120, or just get hit with 120 damage from a Gishat deck. But despite all this, today I have a deck for you that is going to try to solve a lot of these issues, while also being a very flexible and powerful commander deck. The biggest reason I actually made this deck is because I was shopping at a local game store, and I found this commander in one of their binders. I thought the art was really cool, I really liked the effect that the commander had, and so I decided to pick him up and say, I think I can make a deck out of this. Now, this commander is Karlov of the Ghost Council. Karlov of the Ghost Council basically says whenever you gain life, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and for 2 mana and 6 of those +1/+1 counters, you can exile a creature. Now, if it's just me, for 2 mana, this is a pretty busted commander. Imagine an extremely power-crept Ajani's Pridemate that also has just a removal engine attached to it. If you ask me, that seems a little busted, which is why we're going to build around it. Obviously, if you know anything about the game, you know about the Soul Sisters. These are 2 cards that allow you to gain life on any creature entering. Now, there's a couple of other creatures that get this effect, but these get this effect for 1 mana, which is why they're so powerful. So in most cases, you'll see life gain decks with these 2 cards in it. However, there are some decks that, again, they like to gain a ton of life all at once. This deck in particular is not that. What Karlov wants is to have a ton of these triggers over and over and over again, because it doesn't matter about the amount of life that you gain, rather the fact that you gain it in the first place and how many times that happens. Now, in terms of win conditions for life gain, typically it's like we described earlier. You make extremely big creatures, or you find a way to use something like an Aetherflux Reservoir to ping down the entire table. Besides that, there's not very many ways to convert life gain into a win. So with all that being said, let's get into the deck. The first thing we're going to talk about is the mana. The mana sources in this deck is relatively simple. We've got a lot of MDFCs, and we've got 37 lands total, including those MDFCs. We then have a few mana rocks, but not a ton, because ramping in this deck isn't extremely valuable. We really just want to be hitting our land drops because our curve is so low. Although this ramp does help us get a little bit further in the game a little faster. We then of course have Lotho Corrupt Sheriff, because every deck needs Lotho Corrupt Sheriff. And we also have a lot of cycling lands, because I love cycling lands, and it also helps us draw some more cards. Like we've mentioned in other videos, the best payoff you could possibly get for any sort of strategy is drawing cards. And let's just say life gain does not have a lot of these payoffs available to us. Card draw is tough to come by, so cycling is going to be great for us. Now that we've got the mana sorted, let's go into the life gain triggers. We've already talked about Karlov's ability, so there's only one thing we gotta do, and that's load up with as many life gain triggers as we possibly can in this deck. The curve of this deck is extremely low, and Karlov loves that fact. You really want to be keeping hands that can have a life gainer on 1 with Karlov on 2, because then you'll immediately become a 4/4 commander. From there, the entire goal is to just gain life, gain life, gain life, over and over and over again through many of our effects. We especially like the passive effects, so things like Bloodchief Ascension, Archivist of Ogma, the Soul Sisters, a Blood Artist, and of course a Creeping Bloodsucker. These more passive effects are always going to be a lot more useful than something like a Lunarch Veteran. Although we do like a Lunarch Veteran because this deck is loaded with creatures. The reason we like passive is because then we usually get effects from just sitting there, so we're guaranteed to have some sort of life gain. Or we're able to have our opponents trigger it for us, meaning that our opponents have to make a decision, which puts them in a tough spot and puts us in a great spot. I think my favorite of these life gain effects is Sunscorched Regent. It's a dragon that gains you life off of any spell cast from an opponent, as well as gets bigger over time. It's very similar to our commander in a lot of ways, so it's definitely worth it to spend 5 mana on. And then of course we have Aetherflux Reservoir, which not only is it a win condition, but it also gains us a ton of life over time, if it somehow survives the turn rotation. Now that we have all this life gain available to us, how are we gonna pay off from all this stuff? Well, we have a variety of different payoffs, mostly including making our creatures as big as possible. This deck kind of has an A plan and a B plan. Obviously, we want to gain life and get payoffs from gaining life. But the B plan, of course, is a combo finish. A lot of these standard payoffs are going to make our board extremely scary and very threatening to our opponents. It's also going to be able to help us present lethal threats through our commander damage as well as our creatures. But of course, if all else fails or fizzles out or we get completely shut out, we always have the stereotypical life gain combos. I'm okay with combos in this list because not only do they already fit in with the theme, but you're not going to have a life gain deck without either of these 2 cards anyways, so they just happen to incidentally combo with themselves. With that being said, if you don't want combos, I suggest taking out the pieces like Exsanguinate and Bloodthirsty Conqueror, because the ping style effects that deal damage on gaining life are always going to be more valuable than just gaining more life. But this deck's already looking to be a pretty high bracket 3 list or 4 list, so we're not really worried too much about these combos. As for our advantage off of gaining life, we have Amalia, Exemplar of Light, the Gaffer, the new Halia card, and that's pretty much it in terms of straight card draw from gaining life. The Gaffer is great because it allows us to gain life on any single turn, and Amalia is honestly the best payoff because it allows us for perfect card selection and as well as making sure that we hit our land drops from all the explore triggers we're going to get. If you really want to have a slower game plan and a more controlled game plan, you can easily swap out Karlov for Amalia as the commander of this deck. Not only is that going to get you a bit more consistent card draw and card selection, she also gets pretty big herself. However, I like Karlov because he just seems a little evil, and we also love his effect of exiling creatures, which we'll talk a bit more about later. Either way, Amalia is also a crazy powerhouse in this deck. We then of course have plenty of these gain life, deal damage effects, and vice versa. Deal damage, gain life effects, because these are the best payoffs we possibly could have in the entire life gain strategy. Before we get into the staples, we do have some sort of semi-payoffs, and the reason I call them semi-payoffs is because they don't actually care about you gaining life, but they do end up caring about how much life you have. And these are paying life effects. Effects that allow you to pay a ton of life into them and get significant benefits because of it. The fact that we are gaining so much life, we should utilize our life total to its fullest effect. And Doom Whisperer is probably my favorite of all of these because I have been wanting this card to be good for so long, and this just gives you elite card selection by allowing you to pay 2 and surveil 2. It's also a 5 mana 6/6 Flampler, which is pretty crazy if you ask me. I'm just in love with this card, so please excuse me while I just fawn over it because it's basically a really bad Grizzlebrand. Besides that, Tymna is always going to be great, and so is Staff of Completion. Not only is it going to allow you to proliferate your 1/1 counters that all your creatures end up getting, it's also going to let you draw a card for a measly 4 life, which is a pretty decent rate if you ask me. So we've talked about how we're going to gain life. We've talked about how we're going to turn that life into resources, or turn the fact that we're gaining life into some sort of advantage. Now, just like any other deck that we make, we need to add some staples. These staples are going to be just good in every Orzhov deck. They're going to be good in every life gain deck. And sometimes they're going to be able to help us really recoup the cost of the fact that the deck is not very good at drawing cards or doing other things. Esper Sentinel, the One Ring, Bolas' Citadel, and Necropotence are going to be insane for our card advantage that we severely lack in this deck. We don't have a ton of card draw like I've been saying this entire video. So we need to have some ways to really ramp up the fact that we need more cards in our hand. And these cards, as generic as they are, really help us do that. Next, even though our commander is able to exile creatures, sometimes we don't have 2 mana and we're only able to keep up 1. That's where Swords to Plowshares comes in, because at the end of the day, we don't really care how much life our opponents are gaining. It's not going to be as much as us. Generous Gift is also great as just a catch-all removal spell, and Toxic Deluge is something that you're always super fond of. Now, we don't want a ton of board wipes, but sometimes you just need it, and paying life for one is not going to be an actual cost for us. It usually isn't in normal games, but it's definitely not in this game. Lastly, we have a Sensei's Divining Top, because if we're going to have Bolas and an Aetherflux, we might as well just add it in there, just so that we can have some sort of combo finisher. Aetherflux typically can be a 1-card win condition in a deck like this, but you know, Sensei's and Bolas just seal the deal. Smothering Tithe helps us with our mana, and of course Teferi's Protection is able to make sure that we are fully protected in case our board of many creatures ever gets targeted by some sort of board wipe. Now that we've gone through the entire deck, let's talk about Karlov and its ability. How do you want to play a deck like this? This deck can function as a Voltron deck. It can function as an aggro deck. It can function as a control deck. It's really the whole package. The biggest reason I chose Karlov is, one, because I thought the art was cool, which is a normal commander thing to do. But the other reason is because if you're worried about Voltron creatures, the best way to deal with it is by being to exile them at any given point in time. There's nothing more satisfying than swinging in with a 10/10 Karlov, only to then remove 6 of those counters to just wipe out their commander. In the format of Commander, valuable creatures are usually the way that people end up winning the game. And the way that we're going to solve this is by having the best way to remove creatures in the deck be right in the command zone. Amalia is great, but it's also pretty easy to counter, because as soon as you see it get to 20 life, you're just waiting for spot removal to then kill it. For Karlov, it's a lot easier. You typically only need 3 life gain triggers, which most of them can happen when he enters the battlefield, and you don't need to tap him in order to do this. Therefore, even with commander attacks, Karlov can just be a very expensive exile spell. Although, that's not exactly how we would like to use him, but we certainly can. This deck, at the end of the day, wants to gain life and get payoffs for doing that. And we need to do it in a variety of ways, because life gain is not extremely supported, despite how long it's been around. Either way, this has been Karlov of the Ghost Council. I really enjoy this deck, and I think it's a lot of fun to play. It's a bit more on the pricier side compared to Calyx, which we did in our last video, but it's because it's looking to play at a little bit of higher tables. The fact that it's so fast and is able to kill people as early as turn 4 or 5 with commander damage, or able to grind out the game all the way to turn 10 and win with an Aetherflux, this deck is supposed to be at some higher power tables. Just make sure that your opponent's commander doesn't have some sort of hexproof of protection. I'm looking at you, Ural. Thank you all so much for watching. If you ever want to make a life gain deck yourself, or you're just looking to pick up a couple of cards, you can check down below in the description where you can buy cards directly from Deck Driver. We've got a whole host of product on there, with actually quite a few of my personal collection pieces on there too. All cards are set to market price and are shipped every single day with high quality packaging. So if you're going to get these cards anyways, or you want a Karlov of the Ghost Council deck yourself, go check out the store and the link in my description. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and As always, the deck list is in the description. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all next time.